Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with John Thiel, the Vice Chairman of Global Wealth and Investment Management at Merrill Lynch, and Ben Gilman, the Head of Global HR Shared Services and Employee Relations at Bank of America. Thank you both very much for joining us. This is a great treat for us here. I've heard you a couple of times today talking about different leadership styles and what that means. Can you share a little bit about what great leadership means to you?
Yeah, and I'll probably start in a different place than most people. I think number one, self-awareness to me is, if not the most important, tied for first. As you lead people, as you think about the impact you make as the leader, if you're not aware of how you're reacting, I think you put yourself at risk. That's one. Two, along with that goes emotional intelligence, and I think that's really important to exhibit those two things. And where I've seen people struggle is when they lack one of those two, or if they lack both, it's probably not going to be a very good outcome. Then beyond that, you want to be intellectually curious and courageous. And then I think the people that have been the most successful in my experience are people who identified with some common purpose that was beyond just a metric. And those are the people that could ultimately use that purpose to inspire their team to follow them through, which inevitably will be a bunch of change.
So your style seems not the normal style, at least to some extent.
That's fair.
And you've obviously been very successful. What do you think has distinguished your style, perhaps from some other leadership styles?
Well, I do think that, this is a learned behavior. This was not innate. And I was given this gift actually by some people that I trust, which is the notion that you need to be vulnerable as a leader. And it's just kind of the opposite of what I intuited, which was you've got to be sort of show that you don't get fazed by things and that you're able to work through any circumstances, to be the general, if you will. And the fact of the matter is that intimidates people. And people struggle with that because you seem less human. And so for me, that reverse logic was difficult until I tried it, and then the responses were overwhelmingly positive. So that notion of being vulnerable and then being authentic, being yourself, not being the person that you think the organization or the team wants you to be, but actually be John Thiel, the person. Those two things, I think, really helped me differentiate myself. And again, it wasn't something that I knew. I was taught that.
So authentic makes a lot of sense, and I really understand that. What do you mean by vulnerable? And is it sincere vulnerability or, okay?
Well, when you share mistakes that you've made with your team, then you know what, I made that mistake too, and here's what happened, and you start to lay out some of the things, because it's unreasonable to think that you've never made a mistake or you've never had a situation where you had to overcome some adversity. So what I thought, that's not important. It's not about me, it's about them. But actually they need to see that you have tried and failed as well, and then what you did about it is the learning lesson.
So Ben, this is what he describes as himself as being a little different from a leadership style. Do you have something, do you agree with that assessment? Do you have something else you would add to it?
I very much agree with it. The two words I would have used to describe John's leadership style were exactly that, honesty and authenticity. When he communicates and when you build relationships with him, that empathy that he speaks of, it really allows him to connect really well with people. And the thing that I think he does really well to convey that honesty and empathy is he listens. And he's a very good listener. And I think it's one of the most important traits that leaders do. Isn't necessarily give orders or isn't set strategic direction. It's listening to the people around them, because they recognize and are comfortable with not needing to be the smartest person in the room. But more important, they recognize that their own success is multiplied, in many cases dependent upon the success of those around them. And the way to engender that followership with them is to demonstrate that you're actively listening and hearing them, factoring that into your decision making, and then providing the direction that's necessary based on their input.
So you've obviously been around a lot of leaders. Do you see that behavior, that vulnerability, and that willing to listen, do you see that really resonating with employees throughout the company?
Absolutely. I think you have to have that empathy and that ability to listen if you're going to be an agent for change. And I think where change actions or activities run into struggles or barriers is where there isn't you're not able to establish common goals or commonality and purpose. That's what listening does. is it recognizes everybody's perspectives, it's inclusive of everybody's opinions, and it creates a commonality and objective, and that's what that trait does that I think he's done very, very well.
Now, in thinking in terms of the relationship between business partners and the HR, that link there, what do you think makes for a strong relationship between more the business side and the HR side, if there is even a difference?
No, I think there's a couple key objective and then maybe some more subjective criteria. Number one is I think the HR executive, like I expect of the leaders that I work with, is that they need to become an expert in our business. They have to understand how the business works and how it runs for them to take the wisdom that they have around whether it be organizational structure or leadership development and actually advance the cause. And so I think that's one really important thing. They have to be willing to get to know the team and spend the time to do that, because without that, they'll never, because it's a function, won't build the kind of trust that's going to be necessary to deliver change, as has been talked about. So I think those are really two of the critical things that have to happen. Really understand the business and then really engage to get to know the team and then participate in the activities of the business to the greatest extent they can, because that's the team building that ultimately builds trust. And if there's not trust in the HR function, it's tough to succeed.
So it's becoming a theme, right? Having trust in leadership, trust in the HR function. What do you think about from the HR perspective as critical elements for this relationship with the business partner?
Well, the first thing that you obviously want is you want a leader who understands the value that HR process brings to driving strategy. Every strategic decision, every issue or initiative that a business leader faces comes down to people. Needing somebody to go somewhere and do something. You could have a staffing issue where you need to hire new talent. You could have a compensation issue. You could have a succession. You could have an organizational issue. But whatever it is, you can get down to, it's about the people. And what you want is an executive who understands that kind of the fundamental tenets of HR, of compensation and talent management and recruitment and staffing, are key to driving that business strategy. And then the second thing is an executive who is willing to bring you into that discussion. Now, to John's point, you have to come into that discussion as an HR professional with a level of business acumen and understanding that allows you to converse at the table as an equal. But an executive who welcomes that level of discussion and understands the importance of the role that you play and by the processes that you own and execute on their behalf.
So you two, it certainly seems like, had that kind of relationship that you've talked about from both sides that made it effective. Can you share with us what some of the outcomes are that result from that kind of working relationship?
So when we came together, we didn't know each other, and it wasn't as it is today. And it's like any relationship, it's has to be worked on, and it has to be earned mutually. And I know that we did that, and we did it the ways that we just suggested. But in our case, we had an industry in transition, and we had to get a lot of people who were well compensated to change the way they did things, to prepare them for what's the impact of technology, the impact of transparency, the impact of regulatory change on an industry that was going through this transition. And so we needed to have a trusting team in order to get that. And then we had to build an organizational design that enabled that. And what you saw, the business performance followed. So we saw greater client satisfaction. We lowered FA advisor attrition. We lowered client attrition. But we also increased pre-tax meaningfully over the time we worked together, because we built the trust in the team, and we were able to win people to our way of thinking about what life would look like going forward.
So along those lines, at Bank of America, what would you say are things that HR really, or how does HR help drive that business performance, that ultimate success?
Sure. One of the great examples, you hear a lot of talk about engagement. And having engaged employees. An engaged employee is infinitely more productive than an unengaged employee. But how do you drive engagement? What ultimately drives engagement is, who do you hire? How do you treat them? How do you reward them? How do you incent them? How do you promote and develop them? Those are the underlying tenets of what really good employee engagement is, which translates into your recruitment processes, your compensation philosophies and strategies, your talent management and talent development programs, how you reward people through benefit programs and things like that. And so if you look at what we've done, especially in the last 3 years across the entire company, we've spent a lot of effort onto those underlying processes as a way to drive employee engagement. We are now in our third year of increasing employee engagement. It's highest levels that it's been in the last decade. Conversely, we also have the lowest turnover that we've had in history. Our turnover has declined significantly, and across the company, at all levels, our turnover is as low as it's ever been in the history of the company. And over that same period of time, you've seen our earnings increase significantly. We're as profitable as we have been in the last 10 years. You've seen the stock increase 38% in the last 12 months and 133% in the last 3 years. So you see a direct correlation between investment in engagement through those underlying HR processes and the financial results and success of the company.
So, and I've heard you now both talk about engagement a few times today. Do you agree that the driving employee engagement really does lead to this bottom line, that there is that strong relationship that way?
I do. I think that people that come to work and come to their job wanting to do more and do better and feel engaged and part of something bigger than themselves, I think you get better performance. You certainly get higher productivity levels. And then ultimately that, if you have the right strategy, should turn into increased business performance. And
earlier today, actually, you had talked a little bit about compensation not being the be-all, end-all. And is that part of what you're talking about? This engagement is that extra part?
Being fulfilled and feeling good about yourself. I mean, compensation is important, no question, but it isn't the only level of job satisfaction. And so being part of a team, being part of something bigger than themselves, the shared accountability that comes with that, I think that's just who we are as human beings.
And I would also like to know, because you two went through a rather remarkable merger between Bank of America and Merrill Lynch. Very different cultures, at least from the outside, it seemed like, different business models, et cetera. Can you describe a little bit about what made that such a successful merger and what HR's role was in that process?
Well, so from my perspective, I think the commonality was the client and the customer. And so each organization had focus on making sure that happened effectively. And when Brian Moynihan took over, that was certainly the hallmark of what he really wanted to see accomplished, which was that the financial outcomes for clients needed to be our primary purpose. That was easy for the Merrill Lynch team to get behind because it was resonant with them. And so I think that overwhelmingly allowed this to happen. And then tons of great process and a lot of hard work on integration and building familiarity with one another around different types of activities that we didn't do. So commercial banking, as an example, showing it to our clients, that all added to not only to the relationship, but obviously to the business results.
From the HR side, some of the big challenges, what might those have been, and how did HR help overcome those?
Yeah. I think of HR's role in a merger or an acquisition from a couple of different perspectives. There's the role that we play in helping to integrate the companies. But then there's the role we play in actually integrating the functional responsibilities of HR. So if you think about the latter, it's how do you take different benefit programs and harmonize them? How do you take different compensation philosophies and harmonize them, different recruiting strategies and platforms and harmonize them? And so you spend a lot of time, which has significant employee impacts when we start talking about changing benefit programs and bringing them to a commonality. And that's a very large role that the HR organization plays. But then there's a big responsibility that the function plays in helping to integrate the companies through the role we play of helping to do organizational design, helping to do talent selection, helping to do cultural assessment and integration. And that's in a different way a lot of where John and I worked together in my role as his business partner at the time was how do you bring two organizations together and do it through designing the right organization based on the right strategy, selecting the right leaders to be able to execute, carrying out that organizational design and strategy with a degree of empathy and respect for the people that are involved in it. So the function really plays a couple of big responsibilities, both in integrating our own processes and products that we own, but also in how we actually facilitate the integration of the company.
And I think the thing that you didn't mention, which was for us was very important, is for my whole career, leadership development was a noun, not a verb. And we turned it into a verb because we all deserve and need and want development, no matter what level of the organization. And there's always more to learn. And learning from academia, learning from other successful CEOs, all been part of the leadership development process at Bank of America and Merrill Lynch.
Thank you both very much for joining us. It's been a great treat for all of our students and certainly for me too personally. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. You just listened to another CHRO Conversation. Today, John Thiel and Ben Gilman emphasize the role of developing talent, using analytical tools to help influence decision-making, and the importance of understanding the business and focusing on the organization's strategy. All lessons that are at the heart of the modern human resources. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Masters of Human Resource program here at the University of South Carolina and the Center for Executive Succession, thank you for joining us.